tónleikum í Hörpu í júní í fyrra. Ian Anderson og félagar flytja verk Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick. Góða skemmtun.
So welcome to Iceland, Mr. Anderson.
Again.
Again. This is the fourth time you are playing here, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the fourth time and probably about the, I don't know, seventh show we played here. And it's my fifth time in Iceland because I came here on vacation with my family a couple of years ago. So, yeah, I feel like it's a place I begin to know quite well.
And what is it with you and Iceland? Because usually bands of the size as Jethro Tull, they maybe come here once and play.
One easy answer is that it's a very familiar landscape, a very familiar kind of a maritime community to my own, because I come from Scotland and spent a long time on the west coast of Scotland and the islands, and working in aquaculture and things. So it seems very familiar. It's easy on my eyes. You know, some people might come to Iceland and go, wow! And I come here and go, yeah, it's kind of what I'm, maybe a little bit more snow and the odd volcano we don't have in Scotland, but, you know, many parts where I was traveling around Iceland yesterday was, I mean, I could very easily have just instantly transported myself to several parts of north and west coast Scotland. It just is very much the same landscape.
Do you have any memories from your first visit here in 1992?
When I first came here, it was really just quick in and out, and I think the only memory I have is probably of going to take a look at a couple of places where there was some aquacultural activity going on elsewhere in Iceland. I think I went to visit an Arctic char farm on that first trip. But most of the time it's been a bit of a rush, which is why I decided 2 years ago that I would come here with no concert to play and bring my wife, my daughter, son-in-law, their child, and so and my son. So we had a little family holiday here for a few days.
Let's talk a little bit about your flute.
I was hoping that that's what it was going to be when I saw you pointing down there, that we were going to talk about this flute. Okay.
I heard that you always bring it with you everywhere you go.
Well, it's true that I tend to carry it around with me because you know, I'm not one of those guys who, when I go to bed at night, I don't take my watch off and leave it on the bedside table. I don't leave my wallet, you know, somewhere. Some things I just keep with me, and I have two flutes with me on tour. One I carry with me at all times. The other one is locked up with some of my equipment, with my guitar and so on. The cheapest flute I own is also the most valuable flute. The cheapest flute I own is a real basic student model flute, the cheapest in the range of that instrument maker. And it's also the most valuable because it's the best traveled flute in the world. It's completed 100 million kilometers.
Is that the flute that you
flute
sent
that went
to space?
up to the International Space Station, yeah. So on the one hand, it's the cheapest flute. On the other hand, if it was on eBay, it would probably be the most valuable flute in the world. So,
when you started in the early days, 50 years ago, or almost
44 years ago.
Yeah. Your first instrument, it was harmonica, isn't it? And the question is...
My first instrument was the guitar.
Yeah.
Right? When I was 11 years old, my father bought me a very cheap, almost unplayable guitar. It actually goes back a couple of years before that. When I was 9 years old, 8 or 9 years old, I bought an Elvis Presley plastic ukulele, which, you know, in the advertisement in the newspaper, it looked like a full-size Elvis Presley guitar. Wow! And when it arrived in the post, it was this horrible little thing that was just a toy and was out of tune and just awful. And then when I was 11, I got a guitar, and eventually I learned a few chords. And when I was 15 years old, I could play a little bit. I could write a simple tune. By the time I was 16, I was listening to jazz and blues, particularly acoustic blues, folk blues of Black America. And, you know, I was a strummer. I then began to play some solos and improvise. So when I was 18, I was a not very good, but okay guitar player. And then a bad thing happened. I heard Eric Clapton. And I decided I was never going to be as good as that. And so I decided to quit playing guitar. And I took my trusty Fender Stratocaster, 1960s Fender Strat, probably worth $30,000 today. And I took it into the music store and said, I want to give this back. I can't, you know, I don't want to play it anymore. And it was one of those days in the northwest of England when it was raining, clouds, and I came into the music shop, handed the guy my guitar, and then suddenly outside the window the clouds parted, the sun shone through the window and illuminated off this object hanging on the wall, which was a flute. And I don't know why, but I just said, but I'll take the flute. It's because it was much cheaper than the guitar. And so I took a flute out of the shop. And I didn't know how to play it. I didn't have any idea why. It was just something, it was an odd little moment, you know. But it was a life-changing moment that obviously affected the rest of my life.
Let's go back to this. This is my copy, which I've had since I was
3 years old.
13 or something.
Okay, yeah.
Someone gave it to me, and it was there was a name on it, and I think I cut it out. You know. Can you tell me how this idea came about all these years ago?
The album that preceded Thick as a Brick was an album called Aqualung, and it was in part a rock album, but in part a singer-songwriter kind of album. It was had quite a lot of acoustic, gentle pieces of music, quirky little songs, some of them very short, and it had some songs that had big riffs, you know, big rock kind of riffs. But for me, I've always liked to work in, you know, to bring a little drama, a little variation into the music, so that you can create not music that just stays on the same level. I mean, if I wanted to be in a band that was status quo with a flute, I would have knocked on the door of status quo and said, any chance I could join your band? But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in a band that had, you know, was filled with dynamics and change and, you know, maybe a little more of a musical, almost like theatre, but maybe also like painting. You know, you create light and shade, form, tone, colour. The words we use to apply to paintings are, for me, very easy to apply to music. And because I originally studied art, I studied painting when I left school. And then after a year or year and a half, I decided to be a musician instead of a painter. But everything I learned, everything I knew was the same dynamics, the same words, the same expressions applied to music and painting. So it was an easy switch to make.
And yeah, this, you know, this cover, isn't it a bit over the top?
Well, you know, it was the first time somebody had done that particular idea, and luckily I got there just a few weeks before John Lennon, because I think it was only 3 or 4 weeks after Thick as a Brick was released, John Lennon released an album, something about New York City. I can't remember what the title was, but it featured the cover of the New York Times was the cover of his album cover. And it looked, if you saw the two albums in a store, they looked almost the same. But the embarrassing thing was, you know, he had this idea and I had my idea probably around the same time, but, you know, we didn't know. We were both working on the same cover idea, and we came, you know, ours came out first. It's not untrue at all that the work on creating the album cover, to write all that material and source all the material and put it all into layout and print, actually took longer than making the album. And exactly the same thing with Thick as a Brick too, that we recorded the album after 7 days of rehearsal, 10 days of recording, 5 days of mixing and mastering. Just exactly the same timetable as that one.
The image of you, Jethro Tull, and you, the man with the flute standing on the 1 foot, how did that come about, you know? Was it like a natural thing for you to do, to stand on 1 foot and play the flute, or what?
It doesn't really seem like a natural thing for anyone to do, but it obviously is, because I'm not the only guy doing it or to have done it. You find images of flute players standing on one leg, as I have since discovered. You know, I didn't know this when I started, but around 91, 92, when I was in India doing a promo tour for the first time, and the journalists all were being a little strange, asking me questions about Krishna and accusing me, really, of being disrespectful to Lord Krishna, an important god in the Hindu religion, because of my being depicted standing on one leg playing the flute, which I didn't realize in a lot of Indian historical art. Krishna is shown also standing with one leg crossed over the other playing the flute. Coincidence, okay, fine, but then I started to look further into that, and with the benefit of the internet age, I could research that, in fact, there are many examples across planet Earth, across thousands of years, of one-legged flute players in North America, South America, different parts of Asia, even the Pied Piper of Hameln, which is a fictitious story. But somebody wrote about me saying that I was standing on one leg and playing the flute, and I started to do that too, you know, and it became just a kind of a trademark, really.
Thick as a Brick 2 is not a Jethro Tull album as such. It's Ian Anderson.
Well, that's what it says on the cover. Yeah.
Why is it not a Jethro Tull album?
I explained I didn't have a good experience of doing Thick as a Brick in the USA and some other countries back in 1972, and in the last 10 years particularly, I've done more and more concerts where I bill it as Ian Anderson. Jethro Tull, because of the history of the band, going back, you know, 44 years, if people think Jethro Tull, they think, obviously, about certain repertoire, a certain identity, which means different things to some people. Some people think of Jethro Tull folk rock band. Some people think of Jethro Tull blues band. Most people think of Jethro Tull as a kind of a rock band because they've heard, I suppose, the most obvious songs that are a little bit more rocky. There's a danger when it just says, you know, if you go to the supermarket and pull the tin down off the shelf and it says on the side Jethro Tull, then you think you're going to get Deep Purple with the flute, and that may be the case sometimes, but it's not the case most of the time. So there is a danger that people will come expecting to hear only certain repertoire and that it is kind of rock music. So that's okay. Sometimes I'm really happy to do that. People used to think I was Jethro Tull. And Jethro Tull is the name of an 18th century agriculturalist who invented the seed drill, you know, for drilling seeds in the ground. It's a real person from the history books. And our agent gave us that name. And I didn't know, because I wasn't paying attention in history class at school, I didn't know that it was a real person. I thought he had made the name up. It's like me calling the name of the band, you know, Saddam Hussein or Christopher Columbus or something. It's just, I don't know, it makes me feel uncomfortable. But I'm stuck with that name since 1968.
If I would ask you...
What's my favorite Icelandic band?
No. That's not the question. If I would ask you, who is Ian Anderson, then what would you say?
Well, I would be trying to find a way to make a joke of the answer, because for me it's always about trying to be, I suppose, to sound unimportant. Just, you know, there are some really important people in our world, you know, whether they're actors, music makers, painters, politicians. You know, there's some really important people out there. And I know my place. You know, I'm not right down here, but I'm somewhere kind of just about there. You know, I'm about knee height. You know, who is Ian Anderson? He's about knee height. You know, he's somewhere down here, but kind of standing up, but he's just kind of about this big. So that's my honest feeling of who I am. I don't think it's about status in society. It's not about being the richest guy. It's not about being Bono and moving amongst the good and the great and talking about grandiose things and globalization whilst he stashes all his money in a low-tax zone offshore. I mean, ugh. So, you know, no, I'm not that kind of... I don't aspire to those sorts of ideals of greatness. You know, I'm really comfortable with the idea that I've just taken what I was given, the natural, whatever, genetic disposition, propensity to achieve something, and maybe I've just done a little better than that. You know, that for me is kind of a good positive feeling of who I am. Someone who took what he was given and made a little more of it. That's makes me feel okay. But it just makes me feel okay because, like many older men, I can't accept the idea that my life is done. I have to believe that there is a possibility to make that this. So this is the amount that I still have to try and do while I still have, you know, the brain cells and the physicality to do it. So I hope there's a little bit left. But that's the arrogant old man talking to you now. Maybe my life is done. Maybe I shouldn't be here. You'll have to judge for yourself to know.